I have reflected some views. Just, I guess, reflecting on the long history or troubled and not so troubled history that Indigenous people do have with the Crown and with the King, or, previously with Prince Charles. Charles has had a long engaged history with Indigenous Australians. I remember the last time he was out here, seeing photos of him from some of my family members in Arnhem Land, where he participated in the ceremony there. And so I was just reflecting on the relationships a little bit more complicated than them simply being the representation of the Crown and of what happened here with British invasion and everything that happened to Indigenous people in Australia, and more so that there's unfinished business before I think we really are ready to talk about getting rid of the Crown or becoming a republic.
We'll talk about some of the unfinished business in a moment, but what are the complications that you're speaking about in the relationship?
Well, firstly, I should say undoubtedly there are many avid Republicans in the Indigenous community. And I guess as a general principle, I'm a Republican too. I think monarchy is something, that should be relegated to the history books. But there's the reality of our relationship and what's happened here that we face too. So many Indigenous people, especially older Indigenous people, see our relationship as first being with the Crown and with the royals, more so than it being with the Australian state and the territories and the colonies that developed here. But also a lot of the things that have happened in our history weren't necessarily because of the royals or the Crown. It was the local officials, it was the British Parliament, it was the Australian Parliament, the colonial parliaments. And in more recent history, the royal family and particular royals have been champions of Indigenous issues and lent a hand when asked. So there is, I guess, a more complex history. And, I even think of someone like my nan. My nan's 94 years old. She just turned 94. Charles is her 5th monarch that she's seen in her lifetime, which I think is quite amazing to think about. And once again, just emphasising that, for many Indigenous people, that original relationship is with the royal family, with the Crown, as representative of the British Empire and of what, colonial Australia was before and of our king now. And, there's still a lot of unaddressed issues. And, it's interesting that this is around the time of the anniversary of the Voice referendum last year, which I think puts a highlight to just how contested that history and the relationship is and the unfinished business we have in this country.
The King is yet to respond to Indigenous leaders who have been calling for an apology for British colonisers' genocides of First Nations people. What do you make of that?
I don't think it's something out of the realm of possibility. We saw the Pope most recently issue an apology in a statement on the doctrine of discovery, which was one of the, perhaps the justification that started European imperial expansion into the Americas and elsewhere and impacted, millions of Indigenous peoples through genocide, through dispossession, through oppression. And, so I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that the King would feel comfortable or welcome to do this. But we also saw, especially on the referendum, which I think is a more specific topic, the King issue a statement, or the palace issue a statement saying this was a matter for Australians. And I think that's the kind of, tacit response or the tactic that they do have. And I guess if there was one way to ensure that we did become a republic, that would be for the King to start becoming much more involved in domestic affairs and trying to tell the Australian people or the Parliament what to do. But I think an apology would be welcome. But I think also, if we're looking at apologies and we're looking at possible reparations or what happened to this country, it's the states and territories, it's the Commonwealth, it's the locals that we hear that were actually implementing and developing and designing all of these policies that dispossessed Indigenous peoples and were responsible for it. So whilst the King and the Crown may have been the figurehead, I think we'll find, there's others that have actually been responsible for the treatment of Indigenous people throughout our history.
Do you think a republic is on the horizon in the near future for Australia?
Again, I think as a matter of principle, it's inevitable. I think, we're a changing nation. Many of the people that come to live in Australia now do come from other Commonwealth nations as well. It's an important part of our history regardless, but I think there is an inevitable trajectory towards a republic. I think in practical terms, since the passage of the Australia Acts and other issues, we pretty much are independent of the British, aside from the symbolic matters and having the Governor General still as the King's representative, as our head of state. But I think one day it is inevitable. If it was to happen tomorrow, if there was a referendum tomorrow, I think on principle, I would vote yes to become a republic. I just think it would be a sign eventually of us becoming a mature nation. Just not something I think we're deserving of or ready for at the moment, with those long-standing foundational issues with our relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians remaining outstanding.